So this is the masthead of William Lloyd Garrison's original abolitionist newspaper, but it's colorized because it's the Liberator dot today. In 2010, I became a climate leader with the Climate Reality Project, which means I was trained by Vice President Al Gore himself in how to deliver his ever-evolving slideshow, the one made famous in An Inconvenient Truth. Climate change is real, it's urgent, it's solvable. One of the proudest moments of my life is when in 2016 I shared a panel discussion with Mr. Gore, and I got to interact with him personally. The panel was called The Gospel and the Ecological Crisis. And during my portion, I told a joke that made him laugh so hard he did that old man thing where you rock back and forth and clap your hands. I promise you I'll tell you the joke at the end of the episode, but I warn you, you may have had to have been there. Nonetheless, the joke and my comments were based on two words which appear often in both Al Gore's presentations on climate change and Walter Brueggemann's teaching on hope. Those words are denial and despair. And I'm not trying to be coy, but sometimes I fear that Al Gore, myself, and many of my most vocal colleagues may be some of the biggest climate change deniers out there. My name is Lowell Bliss, and this is episode 30 of the Liberator Today's video series on hope. In a nutshell, here's what I would call Walter Brueggemann's framework for radical hope. It's made up of 4 components, and we'll explore them in depth when we get to his book, The Prophetic Imagination. When someone encounters a harsh reality, like the Israelites did with the prospects of exile, or like we are with the prospects of devastating climate change, when we encounter a harsh reality, our normal human response is denial. We refuse to believe that such a reality could be, in reality, our reality. Humph, the rulers and false prophets said to Jeremiah, don't you know who we are? We are the chosen people. We have the Torah. We have the temple. There is no way Yahweh would send us into exile. Truth-telling, no matter how persistent, no matter how factually substantiated, no matter how compellingly stated, no matter how well trained, rarely assuages denial. If anything, truth-telling tends to harden and solidify denial, since it is the truth which is so threatening. Instead, Brueggemann argues that the prophetic imagination employs a different strategy. It helps people grieve. Tears and lament can help a people come to grips with a harsh reality. Denial is dissipated. Acceptance sets in. So the first move is from denial to grief. At that point, however, the next normal human temptation can be to move to despair, a paralyzing sense of complete loss. Here Brueggemann says that the prophets step up and provide hope. They remind the despairing world that, quote, God is a real character and an effective agent in the world, unquote. They paint an imaginative vision which elicits, as per our modified definition of hope, a bold conviction about an alternative possibility for the future in and through a good, free, and sovereign God. When we talk about climate deniers, we do mean those who refuse to believe that climate change is happening or that human beings are causing it. And so they seem to own the title. Whereas Vice President Gore, myself, and other climate activists are, I suppose, the truth tellers. We've examined the science. We have found it credible. We preach the message. But because we don't deny the harsh reality of global climate change, I believe we often think that we can skip grief and despair and go straight to hope. Or more accurately, straight to talking about hope. The hope that we end up talking about seems to be the hope that the worst effects of climate change can be solved or prevented. Things are going to be bad. We know better than most since we read the reports, since we envision the future, and we formulate the warnings. But then we hope that if enough key people listen to us and change right now, that most of the suffering can be averted. Is it possible that this is climate denial of a different order? In fact, as Brueggemann would argue, if we haven't given full expression to our grief, then most of our talk of hope is probably just denial in disguise. Or we can figure it this way. For many people who spend a lot of honest time contemplating climate change, but who refuse to grieve, the danger is that despair now becomes just another part of the harsh reality. Truthfully, I'm afraid of despair in my own heart. I would rather deny it. 3 episodes ago, we talked about Bill McKibben's terrifying new math of global warming, namely that by a factor of 5, the amount of carbon dioxide that would be emitted from the known reserves of fossil fuels exceeds the amount of carbon dioxide that scientists say we can emit if we hope to not exceed the warming target of 2 degrees Celsius. I would rather not face my fear that I can't imagine the world agreeing to keep 80% of known fossil fuel reserves in the ground. I'm afraid of admitting that I don't believe the world will willingly strand $20 trillion worth of assets, the current value of these known reserves. Immediately after the Paris Agreement was announced, McKibben was asked, "Did Paris leave you with any optimism about the future for the climate?" He responded, "I think that while it didn't save the planet, it may have saved the chance to save it. That is, it didn't foreclose the possibility." Now understand me, I'm all in for the Paris Agreement. I was there in Paris for COP21, the climate summit where the agreement was crafted. I've recently taken on the executive directorship of We Stand With Paris, a nonprofit initiative which mobilizes citizen climate action worldwide. But I'm not naive about the Paris Agreement. The website 538.com published an article just this morning, What Climate Change Looks Like in 2018. Here's May's 2018 map with record warmest temperatures in dark red. As of 2015, temperatures have risen by 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The IPCC now predicts that we are on track to blow past the 1.5 degree target by 2040, which was the target held out for the low-lying nations like Tuvalu or the Maldives, who hope to survive sea level rise. But what hope do we have for even a 2 degree target? What the Paris process did was to collect from the nations their INDCs, intended nationally determined targets, and then tally them up to see where we stand. For example, the American INDC announced by the Obama administration was for the U.S. to reduce its carbon emissions by 26 to 28% by 2025 from a 2005 baseline. When the UNFCCC, the United Nations climate body, tallied every nation's INDCs, what they discovered is that total reductions aren't enough to prevent a 1.5 degree warming, nor even enough to prevent a 2 degree warming. The totals were only good enough to result in a 2.65 degree warming. And this only if every nation reached its climate targets on time. In November 2017, when I was in Bonn, Germany for COP23, a new study reported, quote, "No major industrialized country is currently on track to fulfill its pledge," according to new data from the Climate Action Tracker. Not the European Union, not Canada, not Japan, and not the United States, which under President Trump is still planning to leave the Paris Agreement by 2020. In this morning's 538.com's article, Laurent Fabius, who was the president of COP21, he's quoted as saying, "Germany is not fulfilling its NDCs, and in France last year, CO2 emissions were up." The reason I introduced Al Gore into this episode is because he has now organized his slideshow around 3 questions. He first asks, must we change? And then speaks for 45 minutes to an hour about all the bad stuff happening. Back in the days of An Inconvenient Truth, he talked more about what could happen or what might happen. Not anymore. Now it's primarily about what is happening. He employs staff members whose only job is to update his slideshow with this week's headlines of droughts, floods, hurricanes, heat waves, and wildfires at a 1 degree warming. Secondly, he asks, can we change? And he gives us 20 to 25 minutes of telling us about truly encouraging and hopeful developments, mostly about the promising economics of renewable energies. There are whole days now where an industrialized European country like Germany powers itself from renewable sources. It is thrilling news. But then Al Gore asked the last question: will we change? I've never seen him devote more than 5 minutes to this last section. He has a well-used catchphrase that all that we lack is political will, and that political will is a renewable resource. He will quote a line from a poem by Wallace Stevens: "After the final no, there comes a yes, and on that yes, the future world depends." And then he returns to his photo of planet Earth taken from space, the blue marble. The impression is that, yes, we will change because, hey, refer back to section 1, we must change. We will change because the worst scenarios of climate change are too painful to contemplate. We will change because he is Al Gore and he wants us to. My point is this: only radical hope is commensurate to the climate challenge, and we best train ourselves up into how to secure it for ourselves. And if we are a leader, we best train ourselves up in how to cultivate it among those we care for. If we believe that the window is quickly shutting for climate mitigation, then I can also argue that the window is quickly closing for us to prepare ourselves, to equip ourselves with hope to carry on. Okay, here's the joke I promised. To understand it, you need to know that our conference was held at Union Seminary, which is located on Broadway Avenue in New York City. Our panel was seated on a stage. Number 3, I was aware of 2 puns that Al Gore used to make, and number 4, Gore wasn't known particularly for his humor during the presidential campaign of 2000. So after saying that faith leaders already possess a framework in Walter Brueggemann for climate action, namely the idea of what to do with denial and what to do with despair, I turned to President Gore. I said, for instance, Mr. President, Vice President, you used to say a little joke that denial is nothing but, and he answered in his Tennessean drawl, denial is nothing but a river in Egypt. The audience laughed. And I said, and despair ain't, he answered, despair ain't nothing but the tire in the back trunk of your car. Again, the audience laughed. And I stopped there and I said, actually, Mr. Vice President, I have to confess that I set you up. For the rest of my life, I can claim to have been part of a 2-man vaudeville act with Al Gore on a stage on Broadway in New York City. And I was the straight man. My name is Lowell Bliss, Christian environmental missionary and climate activist. Thank you for visiting the Liberator today.